Yo, what's up everybody? It's Manga Mike here and we're back with yet another video. So in today's video we're going to be talking about plot armor and plot holes and kind of how to avoid those in your shonen manga or your comic. So before we get started, two things. One, I want to give a special thanks to Agun Nation, hopefully I said your name right, I'm sorry if I didn't, for recommending this video. And then also a friendly reminder, if this isn't your first video that you have seen of mine, or even if it is, if you like the video, please think about subbing. I'm trying to get to 1,000 by the end of the year, and I'm already about 1/5 of the way there, so I'm super excited. Hopefully we can get there. Alright. So first, let's look at what the definition of plot armor and plot holes are. So plot holes are an inconsistency in the narrative or character development of a book, film, television show, etc. And then plot armor is the phenomenon in which fiction, whereby the main character is allowed to survive dangerous situations because they are needed for the plot to continue. So, these two things, the reason why I wanted to define them is because they're two separate kind of things. Sometimes they kind of are conflated into one, and that's fair enough. Like, they can come from the same kind of problem, which is like not really developing your story enough. But I think that when your story is kind of developed, they could stem from two separate issues. So let's start with plot holes first. So plot holes are typically created when stories aren't well planned out. And comics, this typically might happen if you are writing a series and you decide to kind of start drawing your pages before you have a clear understanding of what your overall story beats are. And for information on that, I actually just went over that in my last video. I'll probably put up the graphic in this video too. But story beats are super important to at least lay out before you start drawing and things like that. And I would recommend if you're doing a longer series, you probably want to have at least 5 chapters in that series done before you start drawing the first one. And when I mean done, I mean like written. But I won't talk about all that again, and I'll put it in the background, like I said, for your leisure, for you to view at your leisure. So let's get into it. So if you plan out your story, it allows for you to kind of develop one of the most important pieces, at least in my opinion, of writing, which is foreshadowing. So good foreshadowing allows for endings and solutions to problems throughout the story to be earned or feel earned instead of just be given kind of to your characters. If you haven't read, I'm about to go into an example, but if you haven't read all of Bleach yet, please skip ahead about 30 or 40 seconds because I'm about to spoil the last fight of Bleach. And don't think that just because you saw all the anime that it's not going to be a spoiler, because it will be, because it hasn't come out yet. So, in 3, 2, 1, and go. Alright, so first I wanted to give credit to Tekking 101 because I'm using his video kind of as a reference and kind of a guide to talk about this particular point. He did a video on Still Silver. I will link it in the description below. Fantastic video. He's also funny as hell, so and very, very smart. So if you ever want to watch videos and kind of pull some stuff away from it to kind of contribute to your own writing, I would highly recommend his stuff. But the ending of Bleach, where Ichigo is able to land the final blow on Yuha, was he was able to do that because of a substance called Still Silver that saps away Yuha's powers. So this substance can be molded into an arrow, and if it pierces him, it takes his power away for a short period of time. And this is what happened. Uryu shot him with the arrow that was molded with the Still Silver, and Ichigo was able to land the final blow. Now, this would have been fine, right, if it was hinted at a little bit better during the story. So, there is about 686 total chapters of Bleach, and the last arc in which Still Silver occurs the arc starts at 480. Chapter 480, and it goes to chapter 686, so there's like 206 chapters in there. The only time anything could have been even remotely hinted at during this time would be chapter 659. So, and Tekking argues, actually, and I would argue too, that it wasn't enough to actually be a foreshadowing of any sort for Still Silver in particular. So Uryu's dad is just kind of like going through the corpse of his mom, and that's it. That's all we see. We don't see him pull something out. We don't see anything, right? We just don't really know why he's doing it, and we figure out later what it is. But even then, with a 206 chapter like span of an arc, I would argue that having it be foreshadowed 20 chapters or 20 whatever 27 chapters, 28 chapters prior to the end isn't enough. And realistically, Still Silver actually isn't mentioned until about 4 chapters before it all ends. So you can see the problem there, and you can see why a lot of fans hated this as the solution to what could have been like a great villain, right? And I don't want to blame Taikubo like for this entirely, because his stuff did get cut short, right? Shonen Jump was just like, nah, bro, this isn't like working out. You need to move on, or we need to move on. You're not being serialized past this particular chapter. So he probably wasn't able to do the ending that he wanted, but he still could have hinted at it at chapter 580, right? Why not? Or chapter like 590 or 600 even. But to wait until the last like 20 chapters to do a really vague hint's not good enough, unfortunately. At least in my opinion, it's not. So now that we know all that stuff, how do we make changes so that we don't run into this particular problem? I have one solution besides the planning part of your story, which is actually a world-building Bible. So this is something that novelists use a lot, and there's a lot of videos on it. I would suggest you go and look up some novelists who talk about world-building Bibles, and some of them even have guides for you that are free. So I would definitely check that out, because they're really good at developing that kind of stuff. But what is it? So a world-building Bible is the rules, customs, and overall guidelines that you've created for your particular world. For instance, a magic system, which would be in your world-building Bible as well, should be bound by a set of rules. A rule could be a user has to have a wand in order to cast a spell, and they have to know the exact incantation in order for that spell to work. Or it could be something like speaking the entirety of an incantation of a spell instead of just saying its name actually makes it stronger. We see this in Bleach, for instance. But while that's being done, while the incantation is being said in its full length, the user can't move it an inch, right? So that makes them a little bit of a sitting target as they're trying to do the spell. Or like, in cultures and customs within your story, it could be that, the general public knows about magic and they hate magic users, or they don't know about magic and it scares them when they see magic happen, or they're in disbelief just in general. Or if, it could be only a small portion of people know about it, and maybe those people like worship magic users in your story, or maybe they hate them, maybe they hunt them down, right? All of those things are really important to think about. So why do I think that this is a possible solution? Well, if you have a set of guidelines that you have to run specific solutions to situations through, right? It makes it less likely to have inconsistencies in your stories, therefore making it less likely to have glaring plot holes. So this is a possible way to solve that problem. Then I want to talk. It also can be done in your world building Bible, but I want to talk about limitations, right? This is directly correlated to the Bibles, but I do think that it does warrant its own point. Limitations allow for you to create situations in which your character has to, and yourself, you both have to figure out a possible solution to a problem using what the character has, right? And what the character can feasibly do. So a great example of this is Todoroki and Bakugo using their quirks to steer Dark Shadow in the woods when Tokiyami lost control of his quirk. I really loved this because it was a pretty simple but really effective solution to a problem in that the cast of characters, like the side cast of characters, were having with Dark Shadow. So that is the way that you could kind of use your limitations and your world building Bible in general to help you kind of work through a particular problem. Alright, so plot armor. Plot armor can be the result of the planning process also, but it can also kind of stem from you not necessarily doing your character creation process as thorough as you felt you did. Everybody does this, I've done it, but each character that you create needs to feel flawed in some way. You don't want to have a very like super duper perfect character that's like godlike or has like godlike powers. And the same thing goes for like your main antagonist. It makes it very, very boring. Now, the caveat to this is like, unless you're doing it for comedic purposes like One Punch Man did, but you're either going to have a very boring story if you do this, or you're going to have a story filled with plot holes or plot armor, right? So, for plot armor, this is what I would say typically happens. You have a villain or a league of villains or something like that that are super overpowered and consistently like outsmarting everybody, and your character gets in these situations in which they can't get out by themselves, and there's nobody else around, there's nothing that's been hinted at previous to this, and then they just kind of pop up a new power, right? That is not going to work very well. So that is like one instance in which I think you can run into a lot of problems. But not having like character flaws and things like that are consistent for your character makes it so that they're not being put into like stressful situations. I have actually another video too on what character flaws look like and stuff like that. So please go back to that video. If you want me to do another one, I definitely can. That is a kind of way that you can think about your characters and how you can kind of avoid plot armor. So how do you kind of develop a guide in order to help you? Well, I would say you need to think about your character's arc. So just like stories have arcs, characters should have arcs too. And I can probably do another video just on this in general because it's a huge topic. But not every character, and I will say this, not every character has to have a positive arc or a negative arc. Some of them can have flat arcs, but your main cast of characters, like some of them should have some kind of arc in which they change from the start of the story to the end of the story. And in shonen manga in general, typically the main character or the main cast of characters are like teenagers, or very young adults. And it's almost impossible, like mentally, for a child to go through events that they go through in your stories and come out on the other end totally unscathed. That doesn't really happen. There has to be some kind of change, right? And then the next thing is you also want to give them personality flaws in general. So some characters are greedy, power hungry, naive, arrogant, blinded by rage, out for revenge, whatever. And these characters have one of two choices. They either have to overcome their personality flaw or learn to adapt to it. But regardless, there will be negative consequences to their actions at times, right? So for instance, your bad guy character, your antagonist, they could be very arrogant, right? So that could be the way that they come to their demise, right? Or if it's like your protagonist, if they are blinded by rage and they are out for revenge, maybe they need to figure out that if they continue on the path that they're going on, they're not as different from the people that created that particular circumstance for them as they thought they were, right? Something like that. I know that that's a very cliched thing, but you kind of get my point. The next thing that you can do is give them a moral code. So giving a character a code that they can abide by, and then putting them in situations in which that code is being questioned can be a very, very powerful way to kind of show off your character's flaws, but also help your character feel relatable. And how does this relate to plot armor? Well, it relates to plot armor because if you have a character that seemingly has a specific moral code and they just flip-flop on it for a particular like advantage in a situation, then that is what plot armor would look like, right? So and they're totally unscathed. So for instance, if their moral code is they don't kill people, but if they kill their sister, right, in order to get like some kind of weird blood power in order to beat the main villain, and they just decide to kill their sister, that's kind of like a plot armor, right? It's in a plot hole, but it makes it so that that character doesn't feel relatable anymore. They haven't been consistent at that point. And then my final thing is and this is probably the most important point, you want your character to be able to solve their problems using the skill set or the magic that they have already had throughout the story, right? Your story should feel like a puzzle that needs to be solved. And after you're done plotting it out, it should feel very satisfying for you and for your main character. So I could go on with these kinds of examples forever, but the bottom line is us as readers and just people in general, we're pretty rigid as a whole in regards to our outlook on life. So we are going to relate to characters that are rigid with their outlook on life. That's why you need to be able to create characters that have these personality types, flaws, codes, etc. This is what makes stories feel relatable and interesting, and this is what's going to help you not fall into creating plot armor for your characters. And then finally, again, I said this a billion times, but failing is a good thing for your characters. You want them to fail throughout the story because it makes the end and the payoff at the end so much sweeter. Alright, so I hope that this was very helpful. I know this was a pretty lengthy video. Hopefully this new, I'm gonna keep messing around with the way the video looks and stuff, depending on how I feel and depending on what the reception is to the videos. I'm gonna try this out and kind of pop things up on screen, a little bit more editing, and see how y'all like it. Yeah, don't be afraid to comment down below. What do you agree with? What don't you agree with? And then also, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you have other videos that you want me to do, please comment that, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Alright, I'm Manga Mike, and I'm out.